What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York. We are back at the Market Hotel in Brooklyn, and today we are here with Exhorder. Thank you all for being here.
Hey, thanks for having us. Thanks for caring. Thanks for caring one little bit.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. The new record, Mourn the Southern Skies, absolutely a brutal record. What I'm curious is, this is the first record in 27 years, the first record I was live for to see the release of. What I'm curious is, being that it was such a long time, this wasn't just a direct follow-up to The Law, right? This was a fresh start for Exhorder and kind of like a new beginning.
In some ways, perhaps. However, this was probably the direction that we were heading in anyway. So for all the people that might be concerned that we've made some kind of major transition, we were going this path anyway. So it is a bit of a compilation of music that was pieced together over the years from then to now, but some of it's fresh. A handful of songs are brand new, but a lot of it is stuff that's just been sitting on the back burner.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you and Vince are like the only original members from that lineup. So for you, when you joined Exhorder, were you looking at the previous two albums and being like, this is how I have to play, this is what I need to do, or did the rest of the band kind of want you to bring a little bit of your own mix to the group?
I definitely have an opportunity to bring my own thing in, but I mean, when it comes to the first two original albums, there's not much playing around with the material that Vince wrote. So I, step into the, I do it as it should be, but then I get my own little thing on it. When the new album, I finally get to put a little piece of my heart into it.
There you go. You mentioned that you were kind of going in the direction that people were hearing in this album. So there was kind of like a preconceived idea when going into the studio, or was there any like improvising at all on this record, or like experimentation?
We did have to do a fair bit of experimenting. I think maybe the first two or three songs, the first song that I did vocal demos for was actually the first single, My Time, and that one fell out pretty naturally as is. It's just a demo version. It's almost the same though. But after that, there were a handful of songs that we were doing that we'd listen back and go, well, it sounds great, but it doesn't sound like Exhorder. So I kind of took it back to the drawing board and tweaked it around a little to give it a little bit more of an Exhorder feeling and an Exhorder vibe versus just some heavy music with some cool vocals. It was tricky at first.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys find it easier to like write music and come up with ideas when you're like alone and kind of like in isolation? I also thought that isolation is kind of like the best fuel for writing a metal record. Or is it easier to kind of write music when you guys are playing as a band?
I find it hits you just when it hits you. You're either in a creative mode or you're not, and you might be behind the wheel of a car when it happens. So the good news is now you can just turn on your voice recorder on your phone and record an idea, and makes it a little easier to save it versus having to hurry up and drive home and go write it down. But when you are in crunch time and there's very little room for error, it's kind of scary when you're in a writer's block mode at that point.
How about for you? Because you mentioned that you were allowed to bring in your own creative element with the band. Was it a little bit easier to were you like alone when coming up with certain ideas for the music, or were you?
In this particular instance, man, like Kyle said, you never know. Inspiration comes in many different forms. In this instance, I did a guest solo on a Wednesday night for Michael Sweet in Houston. Went to New Orleans on a Thursday night. Sat with Vince and the engineer Dwayne Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I don't know how to explain it. There was no prepping for it. I don't know. It was one of those things that it happened when it happened. At that point, that moment, I let the music come and speak to me, and I translated what I heard in my head, in my heart, and put it in. It was just it was a different one, because usually I triple track my leads and spend time with them. This one I walked in, to uncharted territory, and like it was a wild experience. It was a wild one, but it got taken care of in a fast time.
There you go. That's Cataclysm sound checking, by the way, for any of you guys wondering. It's going to be a brutal night here tonight. What I find unique is, there's 3 records. So, you put out your first record, there's a lot of room for trial and error. But for you, being that this is the 3rd Exhorder record, you kind of, in a way, just answered it. But did you always take a new approach to every Exhorder record? Or was there like a formula that you kind of always stuck with the making of each record?
The only one that we really were, I shouldn't say that we were prepared for. The one that we were most prepared for when it happened was the Slaughter in the Vatican album, because we had done 2 demos before that, really 3 technically, and most of those songs made it to the album. So by the time we recorded the album, we knew those songs inside and out. We knew what we wanted to do with it. There was very little need for experimentation.
That can't be Cataclysm right now, is it?
Sorry, I just had to bust a move.
But that's Cataclysm right now. Man, they're selling out hard.
When we did The Law, we really weren't as well prepared. We were doing a lot of writing in the studio. We pulled a couple of older songs out and the Black Sabbath remake that we did. So this time around with Mourn the Southern Skies, we definitely had a lot better idea of what we wanted to do. We were still doing some writing in the studio, but I've gotten to the point where I actually enjoy writing in the studio, because I think it helps with some of the most interesting creative situations when you're under the gun like that, and it just kind of falls into place at the right time. It's weird. I write well in the studio. Not everybody does.
Well, I feel like, I've interviewed a lot of musicians. They say they hate being in the studio. It's like a nightmare. But I'd imagine it's such a frustrating, pressuring environment. If you're writing a heavy, brutal beast of a record, that's got to deliver some fuel in there, right? If you're in a tense environment.
I'd say so, yeah. And I guess that must explain a lot of myself to me, because I love being in the studio. Most musicians hate it. Of course, that means Kyle's got to love it, right?
There you go. One question I'm curious is, now that you're reuniting and, you're playing live shows again, do you try to execute the material, especially with the brand new record, do you try to execute the material exactly how people are hearing it on the album, or do you like to maybe change things up a little bit in the live presence to make it a different experience?
Exhorder's less of a jam band than it is a kind of cerebrally mapped out thing. Now, we do have jams that we do on the album, but they're pretty well thought out, I think. So we're probably more interested in replicating the recording, but it doesn't have to be perfect or note for note. We take some liberties here and there.
How about for you? Are you trying to experiment a little bit live and go nuts, or?
I go entirely by how it feels at the moment. I'm almost like I witness it myself, and it's interesting because I never know what's going to happen. That's the same kind of approach I took when I wanted to. I was the last guy in the studio, and I too made everything up in the studio. I never even did any pre-notions. I went in there, and I kind of just walked in, not even really knowing what's going to happen, but I was fully there, right? And the same thing with live. I'm fully there, and it's exciting, and I give it all I got. Sometimes it goes this and that way, but yeah, I stay true to the course. I mean, I've written some leads on this album. I'm playing them. They might slightly be different, and I think that's what gives it. One night this guy may get a squeal, another guy, next night somebody else might get something else, but a variation of the same thing. Which is, I think, is honest to the art and the artist itself, and that's what we are. We have fun every night. We play the same songs, but they're completely different. We give it all we got, but I mean that's what you want. We're not, we're a machine in a way, but not one that's repeating itself.
There you go. And one question I have for you, Kyle, is for a vocalist, does a lyrical concept ever determine the music itself, or do you need to hear music before you come up with lyrics? And do you maybe like to leave your lyrics open to interpretation, or kind of get them to see things from your point of view?
That's actually a good question. On occasion, I've come up with an idea here and there and then built the song around it, but 9 times out of 10, if I'm not writing the song myself, the music's handed to me, and then I write the vocals. And after I write the vocals, that's usually where the words start coming in. The lyrics come last, always, for me. Otherwise, I do like to leave it subject to interpretation. there are things that drive me to feel a certain way to write these words, but I'm a firm believer in that when a song becomes available to the public, that it no longer belongs to just me and whoever I wrote the song with, belongs to everybody. So what it means to you might be something completely different to me, and that's the way I'd rather it be.
Very interesting. And I have two more questions for you. I know you're from Houston, but being that Exhorder originated from New Orleans, I feel like New Orleans now has a great scene with bands like Goat Whore or Cane Hill, sort of rising. But, obviously the home of Pantera and I Hate God and so many great bands. Was there like a scene in New Orleans that you guys kind of cut your teeth in, or was Exhorder always a band that tried to play outside your hometown to get the name out there?
There were several years before we even got into talks with record labels where we had almost nothing but New Orleans. So there were a handful of punk bands and some metal bands before us that we followed and grew up watching, and then we came on the scene and kind of entrenched ourselves in there as a contender, and it built really, really strongly for a matter of years. And then I guess probably since the mid-90s, it's never been quite the same as it was in the late 80s, early 90s. And I don't want to be that old guy going, oh, it's not like the old days. But, I mean, it really kind of isn't, because back then it was a lot of all ages shows, and older people went, younger people went, and it was huge. And now it's tough to get the all ages shows. The kids just don't have the opportunity to see the bands unless there's an underage scene that I don't know about because I'm in bed by 9 with ice cream.
Yeah, there you go. You got to get more matinee shows happening for the kids.
That's it.
And the final question I want to ask you is my favorite question to ask every artist, because it's always the hardest question for every artist to answer. And I want you both to answer it too, starting with you. How do you know when a song is done?
How do you know when it's done?
Yeah. And please don't say when you get the CD in print, because that's such a
Absolutely not. No. In this case, in scenario, you just feel it. You know it. There's a belief. There's the belief, and there's a knowing. There's it's it. You feel it all inside of you. Because you do have to sign off at some point. That's what makes art. You got to sign off on it, abandon it in a sense. And then put it out. Yeah, you know it. That at this age, you know it.
All right. Better than a couple of other answers I've gotten. How about you?
I think it's fair to say that almost no musician ever lets that song go to print feeling like there's nothing left to do on it. There's always something. And the thing I like about the way the recording process is now versus 25, 30 years ago when it was analog tape and just so little time with so little money to work with, I have more of an opportunity for go-backs to go correct things so that I don't walk away from it going, I wish I had done this. So I would say you just come to a point where you have to say, I can't waste any more time on this. I'm going to end up messing it up. And at some point it does have to go out there for somebody else. So whatever trick vocally or guitar-wise or drum-wise that you hear in your head that you're not being able to get out, at some point you just got to abandon it and say, good enough is good enough, and we need to move on from this.
Those are the best answers. That's such a breath of fresh air to hear. People have been so oh, when I get the final mix back, or when you get that.
I didn't have time to reflect. I walked in, did my leads in 3 days. I didn't have I didn't know what I was going into. I walked in. I didn't have time to reflect. I signed off immediately as it was going down. But I had Vinny there, and then we were looking at each other. I was getting nods, I felt the vibe. But it was one of those, it was kind of scary, man.
There you go.
I've never done anything like this in my life. I was scary. Walked into a pressure cooker.
Pressure is always a good fuel for metal.
I survived it.
So before we go, I'd like to thank you guys so much for your time today, and welcome back to the world of heavy metal. We're so happy to have you back. Is there just anything else with Exhorder you would like to promote? It's a brand new record cycle, so I'd imagine we'll be seeing you on the road quite a bit, right?
Yeah, we've we're going to be home for 2 days after this run ends on Saturday. Head right back out to Europe for 6 shows. We've got 3 in the UK, 2 in Germany, and 1 in Dublin, Ireland. And the album release show in New Orleans in October, and then that's it for the year. But there are plans that have not yet been announced for next year, but we're going to be busy.
You'll tell me when I turn the camera off.
Possibly.
Well, thank you guys so much. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And you guys are going to totally decimate this venue tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Everybody, we are here with Exhorder, Mourn the Southern Skies, out on Nuclear Blast. Pick that up if you haven't already. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We'll see you next time.